This episode is sponsored by World Anvil. World Anvil is an award-winning world-building and writing software for people who love to create rich and exciting worlds.
Dungeon crawlers.
We would be honored if you would join us.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Dungeon Crawlers, where last week we talked about our favorite D&D settings and themes. Well, this time we're gonna pivot a little bit, and we're gonna talk about a book series, something that we have enjoyed and loved. Well, at least two of the three of us, which is really amazing because the Krebs brothers have not both equally read this series. It's weird, it's strange, but hey, this will be very unique. As Matai and I have read this series and we know it very well, Krebs has not, and so. For you guys that have never heard of this series, this will be a very interesting opportunity for you guys to come in, and he'll be asking questions as someone that has never experienced this before. So this is super exciting. And for those of you out there that are now listening to the show, you're wondering, what is this series? Well, it's definitely not Harry Potter.
No.
It's definitely not Star Wars.
Nuh-uh.
It's not Star Trek, but we'll get to that someday.
But it does involve a wizard named Harry.
It does. It does involve a wizard named Harry, which works out perfectly. So for those of you now wondering, like, wait a minute, it's not Harry Potter, but it involves a wizard named Harry. That is because it is the Dresden Files, which is, Harry Dresden is the main character. This is a series written by Jim Butcher. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to have lots of fun doing it. But before we jump into that, I'm going to let the other guys introduce themselves because, as you always know, I start the show, and this is Daniel, so...
And I am his most faithful on-air companion, Krebs, followed by my very awesome brother.
I am Matai, the other Krebs. So happy to be here tonight. This is one of my favorite book series to read after The Wheel of Time, and I just devour these books. Jim Butcher has made such an interesting series out of urban fantasy. So yeah, those of you who haven't read it, if you've read it already, I hope this episode brings up a lot of nostalgia. If you haven't read it, then this episode is for you.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, Matthew, this episode was your idea, and I'm super excited about this because Dresden, the Dresden Files, Harry Dresden, however you want to refer to it, this has been something that has interested my curiosity, and I have never chipped away at it. I've never looked behind the curtain. I've never taste tested it, neither the book series nor the television series. So for me, I am completely in the dark here. But you and Daniel have had some exposure to this series, which brings me into my very, very first question, which is to each of you in turn, starting with Matthew, then Daniel, how many of the Dresden books have you read?
All 17 and all the short stories and novellas.
How many short stories and novellas are there?
Well, you got to ask me that question, huh? I'll have to Google it. There's 4 or 5. There might be more than that. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, I would go and check out the anthology from the library just because it had a Jim Butcher Dresden story in it. And interestingly, one of these was a collection of urban fantasy. And so you got to read Jim Butcher's interpretation of it as well as several other authors. And of course, I love reading in the genre. So it was a lot of different takes, and urban fantasy can kind of run to the kind of very, I want to call it dull magic, where there's magic there, but it's barely discernible from coincidence. And there's others that are very grim, dark, and horror gothic. Butcher's urban fantasy is got some puns. It's got some humor. It has some real pathos, emotion in it. And Harry Dresden is just a kick in the pants. He is just fun to follow around and to see how he gets himself into trouble because he makes bad decisions, and then he gets out of trouble, sometimes by accident, but like the Beatles say, he gets by with a little help from his friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And Daniel, how many of the books have you read?
I have read all 17 books, as well as all the short story anthologies, as well, and novellas. And I've watched the entire TV series.
Oh, I do have to say one thing. I have not yet read the one he just released at the end of last year.
The
That's
Law.
Yeah, I haven't gotten it. So with the exception of that one, I've read the others.
I have read that one. It is heartbreaking. That's okay. Um, the great thing about this series, like Matthias already said, is you don't have to suspend a lot of disbelief. Most everything happens in Chicago. Everyone knows what Chicago looks like or can imagine what Chicago is like. They've been to a big city. They know that. And it's set modern day. He has car troubles. He has girlfriend problems. He has issues with his telephone. And, he's a little quirky because he only has candles. He doesn't use electricity because there's a reason for that. But it's really easy to get invested because you don't have to, there's trolls, there's stuff like that. They do show up. There's really good explanation. I really like the series because it does, kind of what Harry Potter does, where there's this magical world that does exist, but most people don't know it exists, except for the wizards. And wizards are special people that are born with this capability to cast magic. Again, very similar to Harry Potter. And because of this, they have knowledge of the fairy realms. They have knowledge of these other creatures that do exist in the world, but most people don't know about it. And it's the wizard's job to keep the normal world from knowing about the supernatural world. Because if they were to know, they would freak out. They would lose their crap. And that's probably true. If, you're sitting in downtown anywhere and suddenly this giant zombie T-Rex walks by, you probably lose your crap.
That is an apt assumption, right?
Yeah.
Actually, as you were talking about it, before you said zombie T-Rex, mind you, as you were talking about that, I'm like, when you watch something like The Walking Dead, and you see people encountering Zeds for the first time, or zombies and all that stuff, they freak out. Understandably, they're monstrous, and they don't know how to deal with it. And I'm like, now hang on a second. Take the modern zeitgeist and put us in a zombie apocalypse. Terror, sure, because it's a horrific thing.
Yeah.
But would we not know what to do? Are we not educated enough now on this whole thing? I mean, I guess one feather in the cap of Stephanie Meyer is that, she brought us vampires and then subverted expectations. They were stupid subversions, but subverted expectations, right? And so I do wonder, and the reason I say all this is in the world of Harry Dresden, they're trying to keep the normies separate from the Fae people and the mythological and the magic, right? But why? And you said it's because people would freak out. That's the assumption. But what if that didn't happen? What if the world was exposed? We were all shocked and amazed and awed, but then very rapidly we learned not only to coexist, but to benefit from one another. I mean, it's just a curiosity question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He actually goes into that. In several of the earlier books, he's focused mainly on keeping people from finding out, except when he absolutely has to and he trusts them.
Yes.
And then later on, he explains why. And most of these magical creatures will eat you.
Yes.
They will eat your face off. And as long as you don't notice them, they're usually content to leave you alone and focus on other people who do notice them because they're hunters. They like to play with their food. And being aware of the magical creatures makes you a potential prey. And it is so unusual for a magical creature or being to injure or significantly damage. They'll toy with you a little. Some of the Fae will toy with you, but they won't. It's so rare that's when Harry gets called in, to try and figure this out or fix someone who's gone rogue.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the thing is, besides Fae, you also have werewolves. Now, the werewolves aren't a traditional type werewolf that we are used to that are, half human, half wolf. They actually turn into a wolf, which I really like. You also have vampires, and you have a distinction of the different types of vampires. You have the Red Court, which is more of the suave, sophisticated, beautiful vampire. But you have the White Court. These are more like succubus. They actually they feed off of your emotions
Mm.
and sexual energy and stuff like that. Then you have the Black Court. These are the vampires that are more like Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, that's what I was
Yeah.
thinking.
And so it's really cool how they've taken this, he's taken this lore and broken it into changing these things up. But really, and other than the vampires, they're the ones that, well, whether you know or not, they play with their food. But the Fae, really, the Fae leave you alone, and they're more of the scary ones, you know. And there's the Queen of Winter, there's the Queen of Summer, but more importantly, the really cool thing is Santa Claus is one of these Fae. And
hang on, now don't go too deep. Don't
okay.
Don't ruin surprises.
Well,
I'm just saying,
he's called a jolly old elf.
yes,
I mean that's
yeah.
fair.
But I really love. I wasn't going to go into any like spoilers or anything like that, but I really like how he took things like that. You know, there is Krampus in this universe.
Heck yes.
And he is
Heck
different
yes.
than Santa Claus. But even Santa
He
Claus,
better be.
when he's, you know, when it's not that time of year, he is part of, you know, the Winter Court, and he does hunt. So it's very interesting how he's taken these tales and made them into something interesting. Jim Butcher has.
You guys know how I am a huge fan of the Wheel of Time. And the premise of the Wheel of Time is that time is a cycle, and all the legends and stories that we have today were based on actual events from some previous turning of the wheel. And so that's why these books can weave in the legends of King Arthur, why it can reference 20th century historical facts, but all the names and places have changed and morphed as they do over thousands and thousands of years. So spotting those things makes the read of that series so interesting. Butcher does something very similar. He takes all these legends and stories, and not just Western European. He'll pull in a lot of other additional stuff, and sometimes he'll come up with something, and I'm like, I have never heard of this monster or legend before. I must know more. You know, and when a book grabs you and drives you to learn more, now that's a good premise. That's a good hook for your story. So every legend, everything you can think of, every fairy tale somehow finds a place in the Dresden Files.
Okay, so that is a great. First of all, that's a great selling point. Second, that brings me to my next question, which is, of course, we have Harry Dresden, but are there other main characters that aren't too spoilery to discuss right now?
So the book is written from first person perspective. So Harry is the character throughout the entire series.
All right.
Yeah. Now that there are several characters that play a pivotal point in those story that are, you know, companions, friends, sidekicks, whatever you want to call them. There's some really cool characters like the Swords of the Cross. They're really pivotal, and one of them is one of Harry's really good friends. You have other characters, which I'll let Matai bring up. But throughout the entire series, it is Harry's story, because it is told from a first-person perspective and not a third person. So you can't have multiple storylines here. It is everything that is happening is from Harry's perspective.
That makes sense.
And Harry is not necessarily a reliable narrator in that your perspective as a reader is limited by Harry's perceptions.
Yes.
You don't know things that he doesn't know. And the book tends to lead you to make the same assumptions that he makes. And sometimes Butcher uses that masterfully for plot twists at the end, when he's like, oh gosh, I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, and one of the wonderful things also is Harry makes mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and sometimes he gets his butt kicked. I mean, you know, talking about The Mandalorian, I remember when we did the review about that show, we all really appreciated the fact that you know, Mando kept getting shot, knocked down, get beat up. You know, we saw a hero that, you know, kept getting knocked down but kept standing up, and I think that's why we really like Luke from the original series, because we saw those failures. You see this throughout the whole series with Harry. I mean, there are times where he gets his back broken, where he gets the crap beat out of him. His clothes are torn up. He's bleeding. He's scraped and bruised. And then magic doesn't solve that. You know, he still talks about, you know, in the next book where, you know, he's still recovering. So I really appreciate the fact that magic doesn't resolve all problems in this series.
Another thing about this series is that your main character changes and grows in drastic
Yes.
ways. I mean, I could give you an example, but it would be one of the best spoilers in the series, and I don't want to do that. I mean, there's definitely places you would not expect a main character to go. The stakes are definitely high in all of this.
I think one way we could talk about that without spoiling anything is, in the very beginning of the series, he's very cynical. He's had a rough life. And we when we first are introduced to him, he's very cynical because the White Court, not the White Court. Is it the White Court? No, the Wizards.
Winter Court?
Council.
No, not the Wizards Council. I forgot.
Yeah.
The White Council.
The White Council. Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting things mixed up.
It's
So
hard
the
to
White,
keep it straight.
Yeah. So the White Council is kind of this governing body over wizards. And Harry did something when he was younger, which kind of put them in their bad graces. And generally, when you do something like what he did, you're put to death. Well, he wasn't, but he was kind of in this period of where everyone's watching him.
Yeah.
He has a warden watching over him. And so he's kind of cynical, and he is kind of this grumpy guy, but he's doing this because he's got to pay the bills. But over the course of the series, you see him moving away from that. And I think that's where we see a lot of that growth. We see a lot of changes that happen in his character, because he goes from this loner to this guy that cares about those around him. And that doesn't really give away anything, but that is what I love about that character the most. Now, if you're not a fan of reading, listening to these books on audio is amazing, because James Marsters is the narrator.
Oh, and for those who don't know,
yeah. So those who don't know, he played Spike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That's right.
Oh
He's
my
a
gosh,
fantastic narrator. I love his voice.
every time I read this book, that's his is the only voice I hear for Harry. And he does a fantastic job. Other characters have a different voice. He does a really good job at narrating. And I mean, that's a good challenge considering it's Harry telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have a really consistent presence.
Yeah.
To be that.
But
narrator.
man, he has nailed Harry. I mean, so I read the books first, then I went to the TV series, and it was really difficult for me to see Paul Blackthorne as Harry,
who's a great actor, by the way.
He is, but he doesn't act the same way as James Marsters does as Harry in the audiobook. So I was a little like, this isn't as great as I hoped.
I am going to have some questions about the TV show momentarily.
Yes.
Well, before the time gets away from us, let's dive into this so we can get into some of the meat.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Daniel, you want to give Josh a brief explanation of the world and we've kind of talked about a lot of this already.
Kind of have.
What else do you want to add to that about the world and the settings and how the novels are what's what I'm looking for, the spirit of the novels, the theme behind all this?
I mean, really, I think I've already kind of captured it. It's a very urban fantasy setting. For those of you that are new to what that means, it means it's a modern day setting with fantasy and paranormal elements. Again, if you want to read this, you don't have to, really stretch the imagination to understand Chicago, to understand what it's like when your car breaks down, what it's like when you're standing out in the middle of the night on a dark street and the streetlights start blinking out. I mean, the scene from Constantine, a lot of people, you can feel the tension as you see each light blinking out. And that kind of happens. Stuff like that in this series. The other thing is wizards, because there's magic, it can't be around electronics. There's something that interacts between the science and their magic that interferes. So this is why Harry drives around a beat up VW Bug, because it's an old combustion engine. It has no microchips in it, and it's reliable. But there's several times where he gets around a computer or he picks up a phone and it doesn't work, and it's because of the magic. And I like how there's that, even though he's kind of somewhat more powerful than the common human person, he still struggles. Like, he doesn't have power in his house. He doesn't take hot showers because the water heater won't work. So he's always taking cold showers. So there's a lot of really cool elements to that. And as the series expands, you get to start learning more and more about this supernatural world that exists. And that's what I really like about Jim Butcher is, each book is delivering something new for me to learn. And it's so exciting. And it just draws me further and further into this world. So again, it's not really hard to pick up and learn, and it's enjoyable.
So on the thread of this setting,
yes,
you've already mentioned it's modern day, but can you give me like a window of years? Does it start in 1997? Is it 2020? Like,
that is
begin?
Really, that's the brilliancy of how he's written it. It could fit anywhere. I mean, really, there's nothing that defines, because he doesn't say, he picked up an iPhone. It's a cell phone. He needs to use a payphone. And even then, those start kind of disappearing as the series gets longer. So there really isn't a thing that says, October 25th, 1998, or anything like that. You could read it and it could be believable as if that story was happening today.
Interesting.
Even the very first book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when you read it, when do you imagine it happening? Do you imagine it happening today, or do you give it like a 10-year gap? Or
well, I mean, for me, because the last book was book 17.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like, I could believe that that's this year, and I can look back, and that was 15, 17 years ago. But that's the really cool thing is there isn't huge time gaps. Most often each story picks up fairly quickly after the other one. There is some times where there is a gap and it's immediately lets I've been recovering for the last 3 months or 6 months because of my injuries. Wow. Harry is back out on the beat, but it took him a while to heal. So, but really, I mean, you could pick up the first book today and start that 17-book journey. And if you want to plug in all the short stories and the novellas and everything in between, the really cool thing about a lot of those is they tell you when those stories are happening in between what books, so that oh, I shouldn't read this one until I've finished that book. And
but
then I
before
can
read
read
the
this.
next one,
And so that's the really cool thing that they have done. So
I like it.
Well, do you want me to give you a rundown of some of the characters?
The non-spoilery ones, yes.
So I'm focusing on just there's a lot of characters in here, but I'm focusing on mainly the main ones that show up frequently.
Yes.
And I'm weighting it more heavily towards the first few books.
Okay.
All right. So first of all is the main character, Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden.
Which is
just
two great magician references right there.
Well, and there's a reason he's
Well,
named that.
3, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Is Dresden a reference to a modern magician also, except for the character? Because you got Harry, who's Houdini.
Yeah.
And then you've got Blackstone and
David Copperfield.
David Copperfield, right?
Yeah. So his father is a magician, not a wizard, but is a magician by trade.
Stage magician.
That's
which
a good way
is
to put it.
where Harry's names come from.
That makes perfect sense.
And so he grew up with his dad taking him around traveling with all these shows. His mom apparently died in childbirth. And as Harry begins to mature, he discovers that unlike his father, he actually has real magical talent. And there's so many things I could use to describe Harry, but they would ruin. They might contain spoilers, so I decided to go with more of a timeline approach. Okay. So his mother died when he was born. His father died unexpectedly.
Was his mother killed by a dark wizard who was actually trying to get to the baby, but then he couldn't? Then it left a scar on.
Well, he has this odd scar. No, nothing like that.
No.
And then his dad died unexpectedly when he was about 6, and he was left in the. He was kind of left in the state system for a little while, and then his. This uncle he didn't really know shows up one day and takes him as his last remaining family member, takes him under his wing.
But that's when he gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and then he becomes a super...
And
oh, sorry.
then Then that uncle is killed when Harry was about 16.
By
Well, we're just going to say he was killed.
okay.
By a
so-
guy who
so-
was robbing a professional wrestling ring, but then
So- no,
Harry
no, no,
didn't
no.
stop him. And
No. So here's one really interesting thing. And I'm gonna throw it out there, is his uncle's last name is Morningstar.
Well, his last name is
Oh.
Dumorn, but he goes.
Oh no, you're right. They
Morningstar
changed it
is
to
who they called
Morningstar in
him.
the TV series.
Well, no, that was a nickname
Was
that
it?
he had, but
Oh, okay.
Dumorn was the official.
You're right.
last
Demorne
name.
was the last name, but they called him Justin Morningstar. You're right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a subliminal hint at something. I'm gonna leave it there.
nice.
So his uncle was killed when he was 16, and around this time, right about this time, is when he discovers that there's actually a whole world of wizards out there. And as Daniel mentioned, the White Council gets involved, and one of the wizards on the White Council decides to foster him and takes him on as his magician's apprentice, and actually starts educating Harry in magic. His name was Ebenezer McCoy.
Yes.
And Harry, and after growing up with him, he's then he grows up, kind of comes into his own, gets control of his powers, decides to settle in Chicago, and becomes Chicago's only wizard private investigator. And he gets called in occasionally by the Chicago PD as a
Yes.
consultant when the cases get spooky.
Yes.
Okay, no joke. So like one of my favorite things to do is to read book blurbs, because they all like so many of them, even really well-written books and well-written blurbs, always sound like something you're going to grab from the airport store just before you get onto the airplane. It's some vacation novella. And in my head, I'm just like, he's a young PI who's also a magician, who's also bad at love, who's also struggling with his friendships, whose uncle could be Lucifer, who's also...
you've read the series? Wow.
You want to know what? You're actually hitting on several points of the story.
I don't see. That's just it. I'm just coming up with I'm trying to come up with like the cheesiest blurb for this. Forgive me, Jim Butcher. I'm not trying to like make fun of your stories at all, because I'm actually very excited to read this. But I just want just that idea of like, he's a wizard who's a private detective who's also a consultant for the Chicago PD when cases get spooky, and he has a talking dog and a tall friend named Shaggy, and they have a van.
No,
So
he has a talking skull.
oh, that makes more sense.
And that's the next character I was going to talk about, is
Yeah,
Bob
please.
the Skull.
oh, Horatio. Oh, okay, never mind. Go on.
Bob is an air spirit with a literally encyclopedic knowledge of magic and lore.
Please tell me
Yes.
it's Encyclopedia Britannica and his knowledge stops about 1999.
He is
No.
British.
He is British,
That works.
and he likes smut books.
Yes, he's horny. He's a horn dog, and he constantly reads trashy romance novels.
He's all, do whatever you like to me, but just give me more Daniel Steele. I
Actually,
want it to sound like Stewie Griffith.
it kind of is like that,
Stewie
where
Griffin.
it's like, where he's like, I'll help you out. However, I need a new book type thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm gonna spoil. I can't say
No.
that. I can't say that
You
thing.
can't say
It
that. Don't
happens
say that
later.
thing.
But
Don't say it.
Bob, I love Bob. Bob is a fun character.
Bob
But
is so
Bob
much fun.
He's also a valuable tool to Harry because again, he's learning magic,
Mm-hmm.
and Bob helps out and assists in that.
So because Harry can't use a computer or surf the internet, Bob basically fills that in for him. Hey,
Yes.
I need a speed potion. Okay, so and then Bob tells him these are the ingredients. Here's how you make it. All that stuff. He relies on. So Bob is his reference, his lookup, and a friend and companion.
Yes.
and he's a great part of the story.
Yeah, because when we first meet Harry, he's very much a loner.
Continuing on with Harry's housemates is Mister. Harry's fat house cat. He
Yep.
considers himself the owner of Harry's place and beneficently permits Harry to live there.
He's a male witch with a cat.
Yes,
Hmm.
pretty much.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
more of a dog guy, but okay, I'll go with
Oh
it.
wait! It
Well,
comes
just-
I'm
later.
glad you mentioned that because
Yeah.
he also has Mouse, who is a Tibetan temple dog who is very large and more intelligent than you think. He considers himself Harry's protector and the owner of any food dropped to the floor.
And
Yes.
he loves to chew on Bob.
Actually, no, no,
He gets along with Bob.
yeah, it never happens. But
Nice.
Mount. This is a really cool thing. Also, is even though these are animals, he breathes a personality and life into these animals as if they are actual important solid characters, and there are times that they are, which is amazing.
Now it's time to chat about our sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is an award-winning world building and writing software for people who love to create rich and exciting worlds. With their software, you can create your world, manage your campaign, plan your novel, create a world wiki, wow your players, make novels more interactive, and make your worlds come to life. You can find them at worldanvil.com, and if you put in the discount code DCR40, you will receive a 40% discount today.
So that kind of is other people living in Harry's apartment.
Immediate
And-
world, yeah.
Yeah, and then one of the first people that you meet, that is one of the first other main characters that you meet, is Karen Murphy. She's a detective at Chicago PD, and she looks like, your best friend's little sister, the cute little cheerleader. She's very short, very small.
She is.
But
I think
she
she's
also
5'1".
Yeah, she also has several black belts in different martial arts.
Yes.
And she will kick your butt because she's bored. She's tough as nails, and she's initially very skeptical of Harry at first, but eventually is forced to confront the fact that magic exists.
And she is a really good sharpshooter too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
She's someone you want on your side, but you don't want to cross her.
No.
Speaking of people you don't want to cross, there's John Marcone. He's the organized crime boss.
I
He's
could have guessed.
ruthless, colder than stone. He's intelligent, crafty, and will do almost anything to win, except harm a child or allow a child to come to harm. And anybody who, just trust me, don't cross him on this.
So imagine Darth Vader crossed with Admiral Thrawn.
Oh,
That this guy is that way.
Yeah,
And
the
I
in
tell-
all fairness, Darth Vader had no problem slagging children. So just saying.
You're right. I'm just saying the utter ruthlessness of Vader, but the brilliant tactician of Thrawn. And then take in the account that, man, like, he will waste one of his guys for smacking a child.
I'm waiting to find out that he was not born Marcone. He was actually born like Forsberg or something. And he's like, well, that's never going to work. If I'm going to be an organized crime, I've got to change it to something.
Well,
And
no,
so-
he's not. He doesn't talk that way. His name is Gentleman Johnny Marcone. He's always
Gentleman
in
Johnny.
very nice, proper suits. He's very well spoken and brilliant. And later on, there's some things he does that actually is pivotal to the story, but also puts him in a amazing position of power. This guy, as a villain, you love to hate him and really admire him at the same time.
Yeah. He kind of commands your respect, whether you want to or
Whether
not.
You want to.
Yeah.
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 That's awesome.
Now, the rest of these characters don't necessarily show up in the first. Some of them do show up in the first book, but they show up pretty early on in the series, and they all are pretty pivotal. One of them is Lannan Shi, Harry's literal fairy godmother. No bibbity bobbity boo here. This woman is frightening, would probably show up in your nightmares, but she has a soft spot for Harry. However, often her favors and the help she gives Harry don't always appear to be help from Harry's perspective. A lot of times they feel like curses. It's just like, no, trust me, I'm helping you. This will make you stronger.
Oh, it's just a Danish fairy godmother then.
Yeah. It's like that. This will build character kind of a thing. She's
and the
harsh.
thing with the fairies and the fae is you don't want to owe them a favor, because for some reason when you owe them a favor, they come back and it's not what you want, and more often than not they try to trick you into owing them more favors.
It's like the inverse of no wishing for more wishes,
Yeah. And not only that, they're very crafty. And I mean, this character, she's also part of the Winter Court, which are considered the evil fairies. So,
for certain definitions of evil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just think that, having a fairy godmother, but she plays for the side of evil.
So, okay. So, Matthew, you probably have more characters to go through. Yes.
I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
go through one more specifically for you.
Okay.
I want you to think of Pa Engels from Little House on the
I
Prairie.
love Pa Ingalls.
And that's
I
the
know where you're
person
going.
that is Michael Carpenter.
Yes.
He's
His
a
name is Carpenter,
and
Yes.
he's a carpenter.
and
And he
his
is a
name is
carpenter.
Michael.
Yep.
He's a devoted Catholic with a very large family who also just happens to be a Knight of the Cross,
Mhm.
bearing one of 3 magical swords imbued with power from the nails of Christ's cross.
Ooh.
He follows a strict code of honor, and no evil creature can stand against him.
I love it. So this is a character who weeps for the weak and prays with his family and then punches evil in the face.
Yes.
Yes,
This
Yeah.
is Pa Ingalls.
exactly.
It is. And the really cool thing about this character is there is several times, he tries to convince Harry to come to church. And Harry's like, no. He's like, all right, that's so cool. I still accept you. It's not like this, well, who cares about you? He throughout the series, he is always trying, to convince Harry to come to church, but he accepts Harry where he's at. He
Mhm.
still shows up and helps Harry when Harry needs him. And he still sees Harry as a dear friend, so much so that he would trust his own children with Harry. When like the White Council won't even trust Harry. But here is this man of faith that will trust him. And and in return, Harry trusts him with his own life and more. It's a fantastic dichotomy here where you have a man of faith and a man that doesn't believe in God, but he believes in his own power and the magic that he wields.
I could give a whole treatise on Michael Carpenter, but one thing I want to bring out about him, there's a lot of talk about the importance of inclusivity and diversity of characters and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Despite that, every time a Christian that is devout is depicted in fiction, they are often hypocrites
Mhm.
or
Or
they
monsters.
are
Yes.
unbearable to be around.
Yeah.
Just
that too.
insufferable. And they're just completely unreasonable in their faith. This Michael Carpenter is what is one of the best representations of a Christian. He lives his faith. His faith is challenged. It is not easy for him to maintain his principles and his morals, but he does it with this incredible strength. And you see cases where it's his faith or a divine intervention or blessing is the only reason you can give for why certain things happen involving him. And like Daniel says, he encourages other people to exercise their faith, to join him and accept some of the truths that he's come to know, but he doesn't force it on them, and he loves them whether they accept it or not.
Yeah.
So as an example of Christianity, this one is actually more of a fair portrayal as far as if we're going to be inclusive of everybody, he's inclusive of this. So I love this portrayal in there.
Well, and the other really cool thing about the series is you do see other cultures that weave in and out of this series. You see people from, other countries, other cultures, other belief systems, and it's done well. It's not done in a way that is parodying their that culture, their beliefs. It's not done in a way that kind of thumbs their nose at. He's very respectful in writing those type of characters and those belief systems, which I think is fantastic. But at the same time, he's being true to who Harry is and that character. Now, Harry doesn't believe in God. He can be very sarcastic and difficult when talking to Michael. But that's Harry, and he's being true to that character. And then Michael responds back in kind, saying, "That's okay. That's your belief at this time, and I still accept you. You're still my friend," which is amazing. It's a way to keep those counters on a level playing field without making fun or thumbing your nose at anyone's religions or beliefs.
That's awesome to hear. The next question that I have is, and again, address this the best way you can without giving spoilers, but what can you tell me about the big bad?
There are many.
It depends on which book
They
you're
are
reading.
And-
legion.
Yes, and the wonderful thing about it is a lot of these stories relate to one another.
Mhm.
Most of these stories, I'll tell you this right now, most of these stories are set up, especially in the beginning, with let's go explore this one magical dilemma, this one magical bad guy. And later on, you begin to see that there were some connections between these. And in a later book, a lot of the evil magic that's been going on causes a weakening in the boundary between the worlds.
Yes.
And that becomes an issue, and you find out there was somebody behind that. And as it goes along, it's layer upon layer.
Mm-hmm.
You can take these books, the first one is
Stormfront.
blood. The first one, Stormfront, is basically blood sacrifice magic. The second one, that Full Moon, is werewolves. And you can take each one of these as Monster of the Week kind of a thing, but it's so expertly done, and they begin to weave together, and the whole purpose is this is a cohesive world. Butcher starts out with just this very small seed, and he continues to build the world in each successive book, because werewolves do exist beside fairy godmothers and Grimalkin cat creatures like that remind you of the Cheshire Cat if he wanted to murder you. So there's all kinds of bad guys in here. There isn't one guy that keeps getting away twisting his mustaches. It just builds and builds. There are real defeats, there are real comebacks, and it's not always the bad guy who gets hit.
And there are real losses in this series.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the best way to look at it, it's like looking at a TV season of a show. Each episode has its own story arc that happens, and it succeeded. Now, sometimes it's succeeded in success, it's in failure, somewhere in between, but there is a completion to that story arc. But throughout the series, there is that overall story arc that completes that series. And that's really what's going on here. Each book has been building and building. And now that we're in these later stories, Harry's looking back and like, oh my gosh, I thought these were individual dots that meant nothing, but there's a connection. Again, as the it's crafted so well that as Harry is gained more experience, more knowledge, looking backwards, he sees how all these breadcrumbs are connected, and we're now seeing that. It's not like we're getting there like, oh yeah, there's the final payoff from book one. No, we had no clue, but now we do, looking back, because we're looking back through Harry's eyes.
Now, in the last few minutes that we have, I have two more big questions. One is, how does the book series compare to the TV series? Like, what's that comparison like? How did the TV series do?
I'm gonna let Daniel go first.
Not well. Not well. And I get they were trying. I mean, this came out in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
It did not translate as well. I mean, there was a lot of things. First, Karen Murphy wasn't as short, and she wasn't a blonde. She was a brunette. I still like who they casted. She did a great job. The stories weren't cohesive. They kind of mished and mashed things, several books into that first season, which didn't sit very well. Harry walks around in a leather duster, and he has this magical staff, and he has these, he has his wand, which he uses to control his magic through. In the TV series, he carries around a hockey stick instead of a staff.
Because it's wood. Because it's wood. It has to be a
wooden.
natural material.
Yeah.
And carrying a Harry Potter wand would look suspicious, but a hockey stick you can get away with. It's this modern thing that we're taking a modern thing, but it has to have this material in it for it to work.
Well, it could have been a walking stick,
been a
for crying
cane,
out loud,
right?
or a cane. But he's dragging around this hockey stick. It just looked awkward and weird. He wasn't driving a Beetle; it was a Jeep. They tried to do their best. I will give him credit for that, for what the material was. it just didn't pull off well. I own the series. I enjoy watching it now and then, but I would rather watch the book or listen to the audiobook because it's just so much more compelling than this TV series was.
For me, I saw the TV series first, and then I started reading the books. And I will say the series is a pale shadow of the book, but the series is also quite entertaining. For me, my opinion is I really enjoyed the series for what it was. But if your expectations were set with where the books are at, you're going to be disappointed. Conversely, if you want to, it only lasted for one season. If you want to, if for some reason, and you shouldn't be, but if for some reason you are reticent to get invested in this series, then the TV series may be a quick way for you to kind of get into it. And I'll tell you this, if you like the series, you are absolutely going to love the books, because everything you like about the series is turned up to 11 in the books. The series did fail to represent some of I don't want to say fail. The adaptation failed to include some of the best features of Jim Butcher's writing and the character development. They did not necessarily do a bad job, but some of what Jim Butcher does, you can look at and say that's a masterpiece. You will never say this series has any moments that are masterful. They have some good moments, but they're never going to be masterful. So that's why I say if you like the series, you'll love the books.
Just quick follow-up to all this would be, do you think that, and just short answers on this one, but do you think that in the modern in the modern environment where we're making shows now, do you think that we could do the book series more justice now? Or do you think it's just one of those series that like you just can't adapt to TV well?
No, I think if they did it now, it would be more successful. I think the biggest problem is, early 2000s, just came off the Hercules Xena Andromeda run, and they tried to if we would have had book one as the first season, where the book one story was the overarch and they had little Harry, episodes of the week events going on through there, it would have succeeded, in my opinion. But, in that first season, we had parts of the first book, we had parts of the second and the third and the fourth book, and they were just kind of picking and choosing what they wanted in there instead of giving life to that first book. And they could have done it, but they were trying to cram too much in. There was characters left out, like no Michael Carpenter. There were, there's a lot of elements that were missing. Bob was there, which was fantastic, but it still was a little weird.
And that is, that's one thing I will say that I really like the way the series did it. Bob in the books is this spirit. He's this glowing energy. He never manifests corporeally. But in the series, they got a fantastic actor to play him, so British, and he appears as a man. And then he'll disappear and turn into smoke and go back into his skull or do whatever. He'll walk through walls, all those tricks and stuff. So that is, and I'm going to credit that to adaptation. Differences in media, that was a good call to do it that way instead of the way it is in the books. Nothing wrong with what's in the books, but if you've got a visual medium, absolutely that was the right way to go.
Well, it definitely was, because that way you could see Bob, you could relate to Bob, where in the books, you're really going off the words, or even in the audiobooks, the voice. So I will admit, I did really like that of Bob. The thing I didn't like is the weird storyline they eventually did, but that could be something else.
Sure.
So then the final thing I would ask you is, obviously in a 17-book series where you want to start as book one, but if someone was just unable to get the first book, is there a book later in the series? Is there a short story? Is there somewhere else they could start that would make sense and that would work well for someone reading a first story of Harry?
Go ahead. I actually have a problem with the first book in the series. It's definitely something for grown-ups. There's a lot of content in there I would not necessarily recommend for young teens.
So it's not like a YA series, for example.
No. This is definitely for adults. So if anybody is concerned about content-wise, this has to deal with magic that is driven by sexual energy, and it involves the sex worker industry and things like that. And it can get, while don't necessarily do things to be salacious or gratuitous, it acknowledges that there is this thing in Chicago.
There's a maturity to the topic matter,
and they will address sex straight out, the way that adults may discuss it, but that you probably wouldn't want to discuss in front of your kids. So book one has a lot of material like that, and if you're not prepared for it, it may turn you off, thinking that the whole series is kind of like this. It is
no pun.
It is not. It is not. But this is kind of a rough entry in there. Starting off with book two wouldn't necessarily be too bad, but you're going to have to come back and read book one eventually. There is a little bit of that material because they're wolves and dogs have certain instincts. But
best to let them finish.
Yes. But there's not as much as in the first book. And after that, it really only shows up when it absolutely fits the story. So starting in, some of the earlier short stories, because if you read one of the later ones, you're going to get too many spoilers.
Yeah.
But you might want to start with book two. I kind of begin to get worried about book three, because there are going to be references and people that you don't understand.
Yeah.
But yeah, just so I usually tell people, go ahead and start with book one, but I give them a content warning. And I would not have my kids read this, but that's me. Overprotective dad.
What would you put as like an age barrier that you would suggest? At what age do you think
18.
minimum age is it appropriate?
Minimum. I prefer people that are already married.
Oh, okay. All right. So Daniel's saying at least 18 and you're saying old enough to be wed.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some things I agree there. There's, there's things I disagree, which is going to make this great.
That's
so,
fine.
anyways,
That's fine.
You have to start with book one. And again, the reason for it, the way it is written, is each thing is compounding. If you start with book two and never go back to book one, there are key elements in book one that you're not going to have. When you get into those later books and they start mentioning things, you're going to go, what? So it really is the life and journey of Harry. And you can't really skip out on any of that life, because you're going to miss out on some really important elements. Yes, that first book does have some heavy themes and scenes where, if you don't want your kids reading that, and this isn't a friendly series for your younger kids anywhere. There is cursing there. I will tell you this, the F-bomb is dropped multiple times throughout this series. It's not done where it's just F, 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 but there are key moments when there are stressful things or there are things happening and that language is in there.
Yeah, nothing is ever gratuitous.
Yeah.
Language, sex, violence, it's never gratuitous. It actually does drive the story.
Yes.
And like if you read The Expanse, the F-bomb shows up far more often in that than it ever does in Dresden.
Yeah. And that's the thing I do appreciate about Jim Butcher. He doesn't put something in there just to, tickle whatever funny bone that is so people will read this. It's part of the story. It drives the story. It's not a George R.R. Martin book where let's just throw this in because I can. No, I'm putting this in here because it drives the story forward. There is a purpose. There's a reason, which is why I like it. But it is definitely not a book that you're going to want your kids reading. 18, I think, is a good 17 is probably stretching it, really. But, by 18, you probably know adult themes and stuff like that. They're not describing sex or anything like that, but there are scenes where it's like, oh my gosh, things are happening. So take that for what it is. If it is something, you're 18 and that's not something you're into, wait a little while and you can read it later. That's not a problem. But the nice thing is it is a good, solid story. But I do think you need to start in the beginning. You probably could start at book 2. You probably could start at book 3 and you'd be okay. But there would be key elements you'd be missing later on.
I kind of want to go back for a second because I thought of something related to your question of who the big bad is.
Oh, yeah.
One of the great things about these stories is the antagonist in the story is not always a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
Harry has to sometimes work against the White Council, which are nominally the good people. Sometimes he has to do things in secret from the Chicago PD. And it's not that these people are evil, it's that they are missing some information that would change their position, or they have all the information and they have a different means of accomplishing, or they think the solution to this is different than what Harry does. And because Harry's the main character, he's right most of the time. Most of the time. So they're trying to do something good, but they don't realize they're courting disaster, and only Harry does, and he has to go save the day. That kind of
that makes
a
sense.
conflict.
Yeah, I mean, there's several times where he's butting heads with the local PD, because there are some guys that just think he's a crackpot. Because Harry always seems to be in the middle of something bad going on, and there's some times where they think he's the reason. So, the antagonist, it's really interesting how he's done this, because it's not always like the big bad of the week, but we do see those start showing up as we start putting those breadcrumbs together, like we mentioned, and there eventually is a bigger bad that he's out there trying to protect the world from. And not only that, Chicago does start seeing some interesting things, which helps develop that story.
Nice. Now, I think you mentioned it earlier, but just to be clear, what is the title of the first Harry Dresden book?
Stormfront.
Yeah,
which is really interesting, because the wizard in there that is the bad guy has not only sexual energy, but he's also found a way to use the energy of the storms to help amplify his magic as well. Which is why it is amply named Stormfront, because these stormfronts roll in and we start seeing murders happening.
Awesome. Guys, this is phenomenal stuff. Thank you very much for telling us about Harry Dresden, who is a secret wizard, PI, consultant for the Chicago PD in a modern setting, fighting many big bads across 17 books, several short stories, and novellas.
I'm just going to say he's not a secret wizard. He's in the phone book. It's on his door,
Wait,
Harry
he tells the normies that he's a wizard?
Yes.
He has it. He's in the phone book as wizard. It's on his door. He's not hiding the fact that he is a wizard, and everyone. That's why a lot of people think he's a crackpot, because it's like magic doesn't exist, and he's like, if you only knew. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So a not so secret wizard PI who's a consultant for the Chicago PD.
Yeah, but then again, that also causes problem with the White Council as well, because they're like, no, people aren't supposed to know about wizardry.
And he's like, trust me, they don't.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive into this book series. I've been wanting to read more about this. I didn't know that there were 17 books. Really fast. What is the average book length, page-wise?
Yeah, the first book is 372 pages, or 320, depending on which format you get it in. But yeah, it's around there. So I'd say, between 300 400 pages.
Yeah, so they range between 300 and 400.
Cool.
Now, later on in the series, they get a little bit more lengthier, just because there's a lot more going on.
That tends to happen in well-seasoned series.
But even then, they're still not massive. They are definitely not a Stormlight Archive or a Robert Jordan book.
Yeah, and the story is so compelling. It is a very fast read.
Yes.
You definitely get to the points where you don't want to start a new chapter before going to bed, because it'll compel you to read the rest of the book.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome, guys. Thank you very kindly. This was an excellent introduction into the Dresden File books.
Yeah.
Josh, I wanted to I was preparing some jokes and stuff. Did you guys want to hear a pizza joke?
Everyone loves pizza jokes.
Never mind. It's just too cheesy.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, Matthew.
Man, he baited us on that one.
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
You know who I really hate? I really can't stand acupuncturists. They're just such backstabbers.
Oh.
Man, just get to the point. Just get to the point.
No, we just went so silent there for a second you could hear a pin drop.
I know.
I'm sorry, my jokes are needling you too much.
Yeah.
Oh.
Man,
Holy
I just need some
smokes.
Munster cheese.
Oh my gosh. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Bye. Can't do it.
Parmesan you later.
I thought we were friends.
We're not friends. We're brothers.
We hope you've enjoyed our discussion about the Dresden Files. It is a great book series by Jim Butcher. If you have never picked it up, please do so. If you are a fan of audiobooks, I highly recommend you pick up the first book that is narrated by James Marsters. He is fantastic at the narration of this series. It is wonderfully done.
And also with the Dresden Files, there are a lot of games in different formats. RPGs, board games, video games.
Yes.
So if you like if you like games based on IPs, this is a good IP to get into.
It is. And I will admit, it is really fun when, he does talk about playing D&D with with his buddies. A wizard playing D&D. Just think about that. So, but yes, there is a great RPG system out there for this setting. You should pick it up. It is good. There are also comic books that are out there as well. So there is a lot of media for Harry Dresden. So with that said, go enjoy it, and we'll catch you next time.
Oh, my little nerdlings. Remember to always let your geek flag fly. So say we all.
And whether you're just an average everyday normie or you're a not-so-secret wizard, always remember to be epic and don't suck.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.